Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those who are elsewhere in Europe or in Africa. Here for those who are in the United States, in the Americas, then good afternoon. My name is Ana Lúcia Araújo. I am professor of history at Howard University. And this is the Slaveryarchive Book Club. And today we are here to discuss the book which I am going to show you, Black but Human, Slavery and Visual Art in Hapsburg, Spain, 1480, 1700, author by Carmen Fracchia. And I wish also to highlight the co-hosts of this meeting, who are Alex Hill, who is then a digital scholar at Columbia University, and also Jessica Marie Johnson. Her video is not in yet, but not on yet, but Jessica Marie Johnson, she is a historian in the Department of History at Johns Hopkins University. Also, we salute Vanessa Holden, who is an assistant professor of history at the University of Kentucky. She is not here with us, but she has been behind this session, organizing and promoting it on social media and so on. Then for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you can follow the discussion on the chat. We are going to take the questions in the chat, and also those who are on Zoom. First of all, I would like you to ask you to keep yourselves mute during the presentation and then during the discussion as well. But when you want to ask a question, you'll be able to unmute yourself. And if you can, please turn on your video at that point to ask your questions to Carmen. Just before we start, I would like to emphasize that Carmen Fracchia, who is the author of this book, she's a reader in Hispanic art history at Birkbeck University of London, and her work focuses on the Hispanic intellectual, political, and religious thought about local Spanish and transatlantic slavery, freedom, subjective hybridity, and their articulations in the visual form during the Hapsburg dynasty. The book that we are discussing today, once again, this book was published in 2019 by Oxford University Press. Then Carmen is going to give us a presentation of about 15-20 minutes. And after that, we can move to the discussions. Now I am just then highlight Carmen, and she'll be able to share her screen with you. And I mute myself, then I wish you a good session.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Ana Lucia, for the nice introduction, and I feel completely privileged of being here. So thank you, Alex, Vanessa, Jessica, and Ana Lucia for organizing this event, for inviting me to discuss this, and also to the audience who came to listen to this, and hopefully to have a lively discussion after that. Right, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, I'm going to contextualize the making of this book and the origin of this project. This project has started like 20 years ago, when in one of my classes, a student of mine, a Cuban student of mine who was of African descent, said to me, asked me, were they Black people in Spain in the 17th century? And I say, why are you asking me this? Don't you see in this portrait of Juan de Pareja that you are seeing here, that he is a mulatto, that he's a mixed race guy? There probably were people like him. I'm sure he wasn't the only one. So both of us were completely ignorant about this part of the history, Spanish history. So I said to him, I'm really sorry, I cannot offer you any reply. I cannot tell you anything about because I know nothing about. Nothing have equipped me in my background as an art historian or as a historian or at college or university. Nobody ever told me about the African presence in early modern Spain. So I became completely obsessed about the cita of this painting. And then I say, how am I going to go about to find out if there were Black people in Spain? So I tried to find out other portraits of Black people with no avail. I mean, I thought of portraits of Black people with the nobility and the aristocracy as you see around in Europe. Not in Spain, I couldn't find those paintings. I only could find those paintings from the 18th century under the Bourbon dynasty, but not during the time of Velazquez and Juan de Pareja. So I started wondering, what is the iconography of slavery? How do we know when we see a painting who is a slave, who is an enslaved person? So in Europe, at least, the iconography of slavery, or that means the meaning of someone who lost his or her freedom forever until he was freed from slavery. The iconography is actually a chain, okay? Sorry. It's the one on the left, okay? It's a chain. So I said, okay, the iconography of slavery, the meaning of the loss of freedom is a chain or a fetter or something that it says that this subject is not free like everybody else is. So to my surprise, in the visual archive, the Spanish visual archive, such a thing didn't exist. Okay, or it did exist. This drawing that I'm showing to you on the left is by Christopher Vides in 1529. That means that depictions of enslaved Spanish people were made by artists who were not born in Iberia, but were born in Spanish territories in Europe, like Joris Hoefnagel, a Flemish artist, and Christopher Vides in 1529 and 1573. Then I met my head of department. I was studying art history at UCL in London, and David Byman was the head of department of art history and one of the, the editors of the volumes of the image of the Black in the Western world. So he said to me, what about the black leg, the miracle of the black leg, the one on the right that you are seeing? So I said, wow, what an image. What am I going to do with this? How can I understand or interpret this image? This is bizarre. I don't understand. So I have Juan de Pareja, I have this chain slave, and I have this depiction that you see on your right and detail below on your left. So, but to my surprise, the small relief of the depiction that, the polychrome wood was actually in Valladolid. I said, what was the origin of this? What's going on here? So I found out in my studies that there were 3 different legends, medieval legends, that actually narrated this legend. But the first ever, one of the first ever images of this miracle was in Florence in 375, as you see on the left on the top. But on the top, you see on the right-hand side of the painting, you see a coffin with a corpse and a white leg. Because what happens in this legend of St. Cosmas and Damian, that they try is a dream. The white guy has a dream of 2 saints who are going to cure his gangrenous leg. And for that reason, the saints went to the cemetery, pick up a corpse of an Ethiopian, sometimes called Moor, and they cut the leg and grafted onto the body of the white person. And then this miracle happened. This miracle, his leg became cured and white. So, but what happens in the kingdom of Crown of Castile. There is a radical departure from this European iconography. The corpse is no longer a corpse, it's a live Black person that is not in the background of the painting or to the right, but is in the foreground of the painting. As you can see in the image, it's not a painting, but it's a relief. And it's on the floor, and everybody is completely indifferent to his pain, right? And I can only interpret this in the context of slavery practices, about the violence of slavery and the appropriation of the Black body. So to my surprise, I actually found the connection of here on the right in the choir, in the choir stall of the Cathedral of Avila in Castile. I found the actual iconography, iconography of slavery in the religious composition and not in the natural fabric as on the left, because on the left is a drawing in Castile, okay? And on the right is a composition of the Miracle of the Black Leg. If you notice here, let me see how on the Black person on the left, he has the two hands together with a manacle. So here it is actually the emblem of the iconography of slavery in Spain. So in the meantime, I didn't forget Juan de Pareja, because I really needed to find out more about and be able to build up some kind of visual archive on slavery. So the one thing for sure is that Juan de Pareja has nothing to do with these interpretations, neither with the Miracle of the Black Leg that actually it was radically departed from European iconography, nor from Christopher Vaides as a depiction of the iconography of slavery. So on the left, the painting by Velazquez, his slave master in 1650 in Rome, it is still an extraordinary portrait in which you see the agency of this slave who was still legally a slave. He was given his freedom from slavery by Velazquez 8 months after he painted this portrait of him in Rome in 1650. Now, at that point, I started questioning which were the discourses. What is the shift? What are the discourses that made possible the shift from a stereotypical hegemonic depiction of slaves, like the few that I show you now very briefly, and to the one that Velazquez has depicted with all this agency and humanity? What happens here? What was the switch? I mean, this is what it was my whole aim in the book. So I decided to find out who Juan de Pareja was. I found a biography in 1714 by Antonio Palomino, which was exceptional. I found out that he became a painter on his own right and has a career, and he made 30 paintings, of which only 10 are known. I mean, signed and dated, and 20, we know nothing about that. Not yet. Let's say not yet. And then I got a stroke of luck, incredible luck. I found out in one of his paintings, in one of his religious paintings, he depicted himself. He made a self-portrait. So what did I want more in life? Because there I have the same subject, Juan de Pareja. In this case that you're seeing here on your left-hand side, is how a slave master sees his enslaved subject. And in his self-portrait, we can see how an enslaved subject sees himself, and not as the master. So this is where I got the mighty surprise of my research, right? Because this is the painting, a 3 meters long painting by Juan de Pareja at the Museo del Prado, that only recently has been shown since 60, 61. It's only 2 years that it's been shown in the Prado Museum. I went there when nobody knew this painting existed. I protested about the position of the painting in the basement of the Prado that nobody saw. I will not spare my time talking about comments from curators. But anyway, here it is. And on the left-hand side, standing up, and the only character in the painting who's looking at us is actually Juan de Pareja with a piece of paper saying in Latin, signing in Latin, I, Juan de Pareja, made this painting in 1661. It was 1 year after the death of Velazquez, his slave master. And he depicted himself. Now, it is very important to take into account that he is not depicting himself in isolation. He is emerging himself inside a religious composition, right? So, and for me, the best, the book that illuminated me in order to analyze this composition, because I didn't know how to do it. What was the relationship between Pareja and all these people in these paintings? This was what I started investigating. So it was a great help to have the book by Bartolomé Fra Molinero about the images of the Black in the literary form in Spain during this time. Because in the literary form, there was a much more advanced studies of Black people that in the visual. In the visual, I'm still only one of the very few who's working on the visual, I'm afraid. And so Fra Molinero's work about los negros en la pintura del siglo de oro en España, and his article in the Black Renaissance book was absolutely amazingly important for me. So I'm going to go through this painting because this book of mine, this book of mine is actually the contextualization for this painting, the contextualization for the painting by Velazquez, or the emergence of the subject slave, and the contextualization of the emergence of the emancipatory subject in Juan de Pareja, because I was so lucky to have this, and this painting belonged to the monarchy, right? Let me see here. Now, you can see him here. And the most astonishing thing that I was so surprised to find is that they don't look like each other. Juan de Pareja, by himself, he Europeanized his features, he whitened himself, whereas in Velazquez, he is a mixed race guy. But Velazquez had already started the process of, I'm afraid I haven't got it with me, the X-ray, what a pity. I didn't bring the X-ray of Juan de Pareja's painting. In the X-ray of Juan de Pareja's painting that you could see in the book, actually you could see that the features, the Juan de Pareja's features, are much more sub-Saharan than North African. And so the process of idealization of these features started already with Velazquez. But what happens here? Is Pareja denying his own race, his own ethnicity? Not at all, not at all. We have to understand what were the concepts of blackness and whiteness, what were the discourses that fulfill the violence of the legalization of slavery that is a crime against humanity. What was going on here? So, as I said, we have to remember that this is not an isolated case. This is actually, he is actually embedded in a religious imagery. When I say religious imagery, I also remember the miracle of the black leg. That miracle, that whitening of the black body grafted in the black body of the white body, is part of a dream. Is part of a dream. It's not really happening. And here, the whitening of his features, of Pareja's features, has to do with the color of the soul, right? This is what is important to say. He's not denying, on the contrary, he's not denying his race or his ethnicity. This is a manifesto, a glorification of blackness with the appearances of whiteness, because the appearance of whiteness shows that he's a Christian man. And this is highly important in this period. This is 1661, but we have to remember the Muslims were expelled from Iberia in a definitive mode by 1619. So it was very dangerous to signal that you were black and you have Muslim origins. He could have been one, because in the manumission document that was found only in the 1980s, Pareja is said to have been born in Antequerania, Málaga. Sorry. So he's probably of Muslim origin. So it's very important for him to detach himself from that background, especially because at the court it was decided that they would not have slaves of Muslim origin. So it's very important for him to actually declare himself as a Christian, as a black person of Christian background, as the Ethiopians were. So what's the title of the painting? Is the Calling of St. Matthew. Who was St. Matthew? This guy here on the right. He was the apostle of Ethiopia. He was the one who brought Christianity to that area of Africa, known as as the first Christian nation in the world. So, as you know, and you may know, or you may not know, that Hispanic societies were divided across religion lines. So, into old Christians and new Christians. And it was the belief that the old Christians were pure of blood, with no tinted blood from Jewish or Muslim or black or mulatto or indigenous Native American blood mixture. So you could have been a peasant, or you can have been a merchant, or you could have been the king. But if you were pure of blood, you were called old Christian. Pure of blood means several generations with no mixtures. And what does that mean in practice? It means that old Christians have access to professions, have access to money, have access to promotions, have access to a better life. New Christians were absolutely devoid of these possibilities. So Pareja, as an African descent man, was excluded like Jewish and Muslim people before him from these possibilities. Now, listen to what my interpretation is of this painting. In this painting, you can see a light on the turban of St. Matthew's, on the top of the turban of St. Matthew's. And behind him, there is the only black person in the composition, which is foretelling. This is Christ coming into the sales room and asking Levi, who will become St. Matthew, asking him to follow him, to become one of his followers. So it's foretelling the conversion of the Ethiopians by St. Matthew. St. Matthew, Levi will convert to Christianity or will follow Christ. He will become St. Matthew. He will write the gospel, and he will convert Ethiopian people, attract Ethiopian people to Christ. Right. So Pareja is doing really is proclaiming himself as a European, as a Ethiopian, biblical Ethiopian. He is facing Christ here, right? And if you notice in the background of the painting, there is another painting made by, it's a copy that Pareja made after a converso. That means a painter of Jewish origin converted to Christianity. As Velazquez was, there are new evidence that Velazquez was a converso of Jewish origins, as the guy who Pareja copied the painting from, which is the exit of the Israelites from Egypt, the liberation of the Israelite from slavery by Moses. Now Moses was married for the second time to an Ethiopian woman, Miriam, right? So the whole thing here is a reference to a Christian Ethiopian, to the collective, the African collectiveness, the African solidarity. And not only that, if you notice how Pareja is wearing, what Pareja is wearing, he's actually depicting himself as a nobleman, as an old Christian, because only old Christians could wear the sword that he has between his legs that you can see. So he is proclaiming that he is the old Christian, he is the first Christian, not the Spaniards. The Spaniards are new Christians. He's reverting the roles because Ethiopians are the first Christians in the world. So he is an old Christian. And as an old Christian or as a new Christian, he is part of, in this realm, in this religious realm, there's no such a thing as old Christians and new Christians and slaves or free people. In the realm of Christianity, everyone is equal. It's the language of equality. It's the language of the soul. So if you have a look again at this light that is on top of the turban, this is the light of faith, the light of grace, which is white. And look at this, Christ also has that. And below is a saint, one of the black saints that were in the black confraternities, and they were all Ethiopians. So Pareja is referring to the Ethiopian confraternity where the idea of solidarity and collective solidarity has been created, the origins of that. Right, now, look at the poems, one of the poems I said here. We ask you, the child, that although we are black, give us the grace to ensure that our souls stay white without ever staining them, okay? All of them, they are no longer slave, no longer slave. In the world of Christianity, not in the real social world, everyone is equal. So he allows himself, and then baptism, what does baptism does in that period? It is a belief that baptism has transformative powers and actually made the soul of black people white. So you see, this is on the left. You have two depictions, yes, of the baptisms of the black people. On the left for Charles V in 1519, and in 1640 is the same iconography, but what happens here with the black guy? The black guy is depicted as a European white person because of the transformative powers of baptism. So this is what Pareja uses in order to depict himself as a Christian against Muslim, as a Christian black. Okay, so and this obsession with whitening, and this obsession which includes not only the realm of the soul and the representation of the Christian soul, which is equal to everybody, but not equal in the social reality. Not because of that. This is not the reason for which they are free. It doesn't count for the freedom, the social reality, because blackness in this period means the social reality of someone who lost his freedom, the social reality of a slave. Blackness, slavery is inscribed in the skin of the African descent people. And the Spanish, look at this here, until 1731, at the mosque cathedral of Cordoba, this is a spectacular depiction of the baptism of the black person, and the black person is talking to God and is saying, "Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." So this obsession with whiteness means several things, and is very, very, very complicated. Do I still have time to talk or no? Nobody's saying anything.
You still can use, I would say that perhaps more 5 minutes, but we are fine. I think that is nice to have this overview.
So I just finished by saying this. So I decided, how do I glue all these bits and pieces in my book? I glue but something that I came across in my investigations, in my research, with the Afro-Hispanic proverb, black but human. That means in Spanish was, well, though we are black, we are people and we have a soul. Not that African people consider themselves not humans. They knew they were human, but they were saying this to the white people who went to Africa, snatched them from Africa when they were free, and turned them into non-free people and enslaved people, and condemned them to slavery, which I believe is one of the reasons for which we still see the plague of racism against Black people. So if we don't understand slavery, the violence of slavery, and what slavery have done to Black people, we don't understand racism. Okay, and I think I finish here.
Okay, thank you so much, Carmen. If you would like to just to stop sharing.
Okay.
Here you have the book cover that we for you to have the clear title on your screen. If you can stop sharing the screen, Carmen, then like this we are going to move for to the discussion.
Okay,
and I have my video back. I would have a question for you to start. Of course, this is a book that is dense. Then there is a lot to in terms of different sources, visual sources, written sources in different languages, in contexts that then include the Iberian Peninsula. Of course, there are references to the Americas, and at the same time, we have references to Africa. One of the elements that when you are showing Iphigenia, the saint, we had here a presentation from Erin Rowe from her latest book. Then this is a saint that is popular in Brazil, at least, in other parts of Latin America as well. And her legend refers to Ethiopia, and you know that the Portuguese, they were in that area as well. But in the written sources, the term Ethiopia then is a term that that refers to sub-Saharan Africa very often. Then I am looking at the last slide that you showed, saying that a Black person was someone from Ethiopia. And I would like you to clarify that, because for the reader who is, or those who are watching us, who are not familiar necessarily with the terms as they appear in the sources of the 15th century, 16th century, and so on, they could have the idea that enslaved people who were in the Iberian Peninsula in a period that was already not that early, because we're already going up to the beginning of the 18th century in your book. They are not being traded from Ethiopia. Where is Ethiopia today? Then they were being brought from other regions of sub-Saharan Africa. Then I would just like you to discuss a little bit about the term, these terms, and whether they refer to specific regions of provenance, let's say that way, in the African continent.
Okay, thank you for the question, Ana Lucia. It's a difficult question to answer, but I will try to. Right. Ethiopia was used for a long, long time in Europe in the 15th century and even before as symbolically as Christian Africa, not necessarily Ethiopia of today, because the Ethiopia of that time meant Egypt, more countries around the actual Ethiopia. Okay, but it meant the actual Christianized Africans against Guinea, which was more based on sub-Saharan Africa, like Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, the actual ones, Bali, Ghana, etc., etc. So it's a very complicated thing. In fact, in the miracle of the black leg, in the legends, there is a mixture. They use in the same legend, in the same text, in the same paragraph, they exchange more that is usually Muslim, and Ethiopian, which is Christian. So there is even a confusion when they write these sources. So it's very difficult, but Covarrubias, the lexicographer, in the Spanish lexicographer who actually defined these terms, is very clear that it's a Christian Ethiopian and is part of Ethiopia. But more than that, I don't know, I'm afraid, Ana Lucia.
Okay, no, thank you. But it was a question for us to discuss, but I am sure that we have more questions. And those of you who have questions, here is the way to raise your hand. You go to the bottom part of your screen. There is a place where we have reactions. You click on that, and there is a function that is raise hand. And like this, you can know those of you who want to ask a question.
Who has the courage? I didn't say much.
No, you did a good job. It's just, of course, that what happened with this kind of book that requires then for people who are not necessarily then familiar with the field sometimes is then this is why it's good that you gave us this overview. You have Celia Martin. She has she wants to she wants to ask you a question, then and you have also Carolyn. Then I will start with Celia, and then Celia, I will unmute you. Go ahead, please unmute yourself first. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Celia. Yes, hi, Celia.
Hola, Carmen, ¿cómo estás,
Hola.
mi amor?
Muy bien, muy bien.
Okay, my question is about your cover. It's such a beautiful cover of the book. And I was wondering if there is some kind of symbolism, you know, in the... Yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, can you tell us, please?
I took the photograph, Celia, so I'm very proud of it.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I went to Madrid. I went to see the Museum of the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando. Totally unrelated and not thinking in my book. I enter in a room of cast sculptures. And then I saw this black man in a white, obviously in a white cast. And I said, oh, this is really interesting. And then when I have to choose, and I just left aside, and when I have to choose the cover, I choose this because of the following symbolism. Well, because the obsession of whiteness. Whiteness, as I said, meant the language of the soul, the language of equality, but it's also the price of assimilation. Okay, this is Black people. In order for Black people to be accepted in Hispanic societies, they have to whiten themselves, metaphorically and very, you know, in all senses. They have to speak the language, they have to take on the culture, the names, religion, etc. And I like the way Oxford University Press interpreted my image, because there are some. Can you see some scars in the face? And I think these are the scars of slavery. And he's looking up to God. He's looking, and this is the reason of his whiteness, the reason in which he can survive in Spanish societies. Okay, but this also reminds me of Juan de Pareja and Velazquez, who went to Rome together explicitly for Velazquez to order sculptures more than painting for Philip IV, because the collection, the royal collection was very low in sculptures, and they have much more paintings than sculptures. And it's interesting that lots of documents in which they are collecting casts like this were signed by Pareja himself. And when I saw this cast, actually is the 1778, but they were part of the Alcázar de Madrid, where were the original cast that the Velazquez and Pareja sent to Philip IV were. So there are all these connections. So yes, it is not just something that I like it because it's beautiful. There is a reason for which it is there. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you so much, Carmen. It's lovely.
Thank you.
We have Carolyn, then I will just unmute you. Okay. Carmen, I think that your camera is moving. Just be careful. Yeah, be careful because, okay, then here we go. Let me just add Carolyn.
Hello,
Hi,
thank
Caroline.
you so much. Hi, Carmen. Thanks for your presentation and for joining us in this archive, Slavery Archive talk that I'm so glad to attend. I actually just had two kind of pointed questions. One has to do with your topos of the Black but human. I read an article, it was actually published in 2012 by Kate Lowe, who I know you've cited in your work. And she argues that this is a case of global mistranslation that has very important, obviously, interpretive effects when we're talking about Blackness. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that article, but rather than Black but beautiful, it should have been translated as Black and beautiful. And so that using it as an organizational theme in your book, it's just something to think about. That's a 2012 article, which is really interesting, and it kind of makes you rethink a lot about the way in which things get picked up and reproduced over and over as a mistranslation, perhaps. And I also had a question for you about translating the purity of the soul as a whiteness. I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure if I'm entirely convinced that the binaries of Blackness and whiteness are necessarily as limited as whiteness, assimilation, and freedom, and Blackness as slavery and unfreedom. I think there's probably more nuances and sort of a continuity, perhaps, of slavery and freedom that you might want to trouble a bit more. For example, I mean, I know that Erin Rowe was presented her book here a couple of weeks ago. I was sorry to miss that, but she talks about candidez, which I think is a fruitful idea, whereas rather than whiteness or purity in a literal or even figurative way, you're talking about a divine brightness. So I think about a glorified Blackness that's not necessarily limited to ideas of Black-white binaries, might be something productive. I like this idea of a glowing Blackness, and I think it might, thinking about your emancipatory discourse, it could be, I think there's a rich potential to think about candidez.
Okay, Catherine, can I reply before I forget your first question? It's becoming bigger. Okay, Black but human is not, well, I do agree with all the things that you said. Perhaps I didn't explain myself in 15 minutes. I explained in a very, very crude and way. So Black but human is the translation that I came out, not at all similar to what you cited, Black but beautiful. Nothing to do with that. It's the translation of the Afro-Hispanic things cited by Correas and Covarrubias, said, aunque somos negros, somos gente. So it's not but. I put the but there. So it's not, it's nothing to do, it's not a parallel with Black but beautiful, nothing to do with this. Okay, so this is something, it's just shorter, but say, we know that we are people because we have a soul. And you masters, slave masters, are the people who have the trouble of not acknowledging that we, in despite of being commodities and being sold and bought, we are also human beings because we have a soul. This is what it means. So what it means is encodes the paradox of being a slave. And slave is a commodity that is sold and bought and is a child of God. So it's an eternal paradox, that eternal contradiction that cannot ever be solved. And so I agree with you that there is no such a thing as black and white. It's much more complicated than that. In fact, I didn't bring this here, but in my book I cite the concepts of blackness and whiteness is unfixed. It's unfixed and change all the time and have different names. So it's not that. What I insist, and I was very quick to insist, is I don't think the soul is white, but it's the purity of white is something that is constantly referred to in the 29 anonymous poems found in 2004 in Berkeley, in Madrid. Just probably written by ex-slaves in the confraternities. So they are constantly talking about this because it's an obsession to make people in Spain to understand that they are human, even if they consider that. Okay, there are black people who are not slaves at all. In fact, in documents, they actually say that. In documents, they say that I found a document, I don't remember where in which page, but I found a document. No, I didn't find a document. I referred to a document that has been found by someone else, in which they said, even if Isabel is black, she is free. And even if Anna is white, she is a slave. So it's the opposite concept that what I was doing is. What I mean is, in generally speaking, the concept, the mentality was to interpret and to assume that a black skin meant to be enslaved, which is nothing to do with the images of ambassadors from Ethiopia or from Africa, nothing to do, because they are not enslaved people. But that was the general feeling, right? But I'm not saying at all that this is a binary and there are no crossovers, okay? I hope to have replied to you, but thank you for the reference. Okay, thank you, Catherine.
I very much enjoy your book. I was
Thank
giving a lot
you.
to think about.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. We have another question from Margot Newman. Then Margot, you can unmute yourself and I will add here.
Hi, Margot.
So lovely to see you, Carmen. Wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I have a quick question. I loved all of this as always when I hear you speak so knowledgeably. You mentioned that there are only 10 surviving paintings by Juan de Pareja. And I know that last year you personally authenticated the painting. We went to auction. I believe that was purchased by a Dutch museum. The painting that Juan did that was a portion of a larger painting that had been cut up. And I wondered if that painting, if any more pieces of the larger work had been discovered, if we know anything about why it was cut up, and if that work counts as one piece, or if it's a portion of a piece, are there more than 10 pieces? I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about why his painting was chopped up and what we know about that.
Okay, thank you, Margot. Nice to see you. Thank you, Margot. I didn't finish that job because there was another person who was also an expert that completed that part. So I don't have the whole view of that. But that was a piece, just a piece of work that he did, and it was just an extract that survived because it was sold to a German person, and they acquired this. But I don't know which ones it is. At the moment, I'm discovering new work by Pareja as well. But I'm not saying many things about that, but I am discovering, and I'm sure there will be more to say soon. Okay, but let's leave it at
I look forward to that, and I look forward to us catching up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margot. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. You have the next question then from Kofu Adeleke. Kofu, if you can unmute yourself, I am replacing the spotlight.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that this is so interesting. It just shows how much we can learn from art. Because I didn't know very much about this, but my question, and please, I apologize for my pronunciation. Juan de Pareja. My question is about him. I understand that in those days, it was illegal for slaves to learn the arts.
Yes.
And so I don't know whether in your, I mean, I haven't read your book, but I don't know whether within your research, you sort of delved into the fact that maybe Diego Velazquez, sorry for my pronunciation.
No, don't worry, don't worry.
Was, you know, actually taking some risks in terms of elevating him as a slave to actually learn these things, because he wasn't given his freedom until very late. I mean, Diego could have given him his freedom earlier and allowed him to practice. So so those two things about why he left it so late to give him his freedom, number one, and number two, the idea that it was illegal for slaves to actually, you know, learn the arts. Thank you.
Fabulous questions, fabulous questions. Thank you very much. So no worry at all about pronunciation, right? I understood perfectly well what you meant. Right, let me just recap everything. Yes, I dealt with these things in my book. It's absolutely true. The fact that there was double prohibition in Spain against the practice of art by enslaved people, okay? First of all, the ancient practice from Greece, from classical Greece, that said only free people can be artists, and slaves are not part of that world. I mean, slave people cannot be artisans, cannot be artists. That is something that came up from Greece and is part of the ancient culture and the humanities culture. In Spain, the addition to that is people who are old Christians are the only ones who can practice art. So if you're a new Christian, that means if you are of Jewish origin, of Muslim origin, and if you are Black, and if you are a new Christian, you cannot practice art. It's a double prohibition. So in the biography, there is an extraordinary biography written about Pareja in 1715, as early as that, by Antonio Palomino. It's 1.5 pages, but it's enough to say. And in that 1.5 page, the writer justifies the inclusion of the life of an enslaved person in an art treatise in this way. He actually says that the Pareja learned to paint when Diego is sleeping, in hiding, because he doesn't want to put Diego in difficulties, because it's forbidden for Diego to allow him to be his assistant, to work with him. So when the king comes to the studio, this is the legend, this is the biography, when the king comes to the studio, Pareja put a little painting of him hiding there for the king to turn the painting and have a look and said, who made this painting? Who did this painting? It was you, Velazquez. No. Pareja said, I'm sorry. And he kneels and said, I'm sorry, it is me, but I don't want you to put into trouble Diego, etc. So the king says, one who has such talent cannot be an enslaved person, and liberated Pareja. This is the biography, how the biography relates or narrates the history of freedom, the Pareja, because Pareja then became a proper painter at the court, at the Spanish court, and that painting that I show you today was hung in the dormitory in the bedroom of the king. So it was really well appreciated. So Pareja even painted King Philip IV, and he was a slave. So get along. He is to write and read, and he signed documents of hiring a servant, of paying Velazquez's rents, of paying, of attending the dowry of Velazquez's daughter, etc., etc. So when Pareja goes with Velazquez to Rome, it is there where Velazquez decided to free him. Because, first of all, manumission of freedom from slavery was not very common in Spain. Secondly, it was the year 1650, the Jubilee year, double Jubilee year. In Rome, there was a tradition for which in each Jubilee year, all prisoners and all slaves are automatically free. So even if Velazquez didn't want to give his freedom to Pareja, he ought to give the freedom to Pareja because it was a general thing happening in Rome, okay? So I hope I replied to your questions. Did I forget anything?
Thank you, Carmen. I don't know if Margot has another question or you forgot to lower your hand. Okay, I'm allowing. Okay, now we have Marcelo Marino. You can unmute yourself.
Yep. Hello all. Hello, hola Carmen.
Hola, Marcelo. Hola.
Hi, how are you all? Thank you for opening this for outsiders, this conversation for outsiders. So I'm Marcelo Marino, I'm art historian, I'm Argentinian, I live in England. And I met Carmen when she presented for the first time a text in Argentina in a conference, and it was about el olvido de las obras del esclavo pintor Juan de Pareja. So it was a bit of maybe the beginning, or I don't know.
20 years ago.
Yeah, years ago. I was thinking, and maybe if you want pen and if you have pen and paper, because I'm trying to articulate the questions about the language, and the terms that someone asked you. I think Ana Lucia asked you first. How does our history and history of art deals with terms as more Ethiopian? So because we learn, we write with those terms, we teach with those terms for our history, and in our history they create iconography, like more, for example, when you say Santiago Matamoros, but it not always in a art history class lesson they will go to that word and you know what I mean. So and how does our history deals with that and treats those terms, and do we need to deconstruct those terms in some way to better understand and to not replicate stereotypes or a bit of that? And I have another question. So that's the first one. So what does our history do with those terms? Apart from analyzing and making the history of those, about Juan de Pareja, apart from whitening his skin, and so I was thinking that if he also makes a self-inscription in a pictorial tradition and a portrait tradition in that self-representation, because I was looking at the eyes, that kind of eye like that, and the long face and the long nose. So I was thinking about Alonso Sanchez Coelho, about Pacheco. So there's a type of Spanish portrait, type of a Spanish representation. So apart from the inscription in the European color skin, there is this idea.
The features.
I am going to fit into a pictorial tradition and fitting in the ways, in the types of the golden age Spanish portraits. So I was thinking about that too. So I don't know what you have to say about that.
I got a reply. Okay, let's start with the first. Nice to meet you again, Marcelo. Wrote Ethiopians, and this is something that is a fault in my book, I have to admit, because I didn't want to write a survey. I didn't want to write a biography of Pareja, and I use generic terms, which is at fault. But I try to use the Moors where it belongs and Ethiopian where it belongs. I use the symbolic nomenclature of this post because I didn't have the time to go into what each thing means at each time. But then, as a rule, is my division is Ethiopian is really the Christian symbolic and metaphorical use. It's not a geographical use. And Moors it means people of Muslim origins or North African or Arabs, okay? Because this is the problem. This is much more complicated. Moors means several things. The Moors invaded Spain for 8 centuries. So they are from Syria. They are from different parts of the world, of East Europe. They are Turks. There's a mixture. There are even renegade Christians who decided to become part of Islam, are called Moors. So there is a kind of a nomenclature of Moors is much more complicated. So really, this is something that I think we need to have more, as you said, I agree with you, to actually go inside these nomenclatures and extrapolate and create new categories. Absolutely, and I agree that in my book is too generic yet, but that was not the meaning of my book at the beginning. So okay, so I justify myself. Now Juan de Pareja, in fact, this is really interesting. There's a second biography of Juan de Pareja written in 1957 by Juan Antonio Gaya Nuño, and it says that he collects either him or he collects from the art historian Justi, the German one, the knowledge that Velazquez is of African origin because the features in Juan de Pareja are like the features of Velazquez. They have the same hairstyle, the same mustache, the same eyes, the same thing. And it's interesting, if you believe in psychoanalysis, in 1660, Velazquez dies, 1651, Pareja depicts himself like Velazquez, like an homage to Velazquez. Like Velazquez set up the template of Pareja as a nobleman, and Pareja adopts that template that Velazquez coined as a symbol of the universality of the Catholic Church in Rome, which is a mulatto. Palomino said, de color extraño, right? Mestizo y de color extraño, right? So he says he adopts exactly the same. He is a symbolic Juan de Pareja. He is not a physical Juan de Pareja. He is both of them, Pareja and Velazquez subvert the canon of portraiture. In the moment that they introduce a non-European subject in the canon of portraiture, the canon of portraiture has been destroyed. Okay, because the function is no longer the likeness of the subject. The function goes beyond that, right? So it's not supposed to be. This is a formula. It's a kind of a statement. This is what I mean. So I think in both cases, which I showed, the miracle of the black leg and the portraiture are the 2 cases in which the presence of the African, what they do is take the canon out of the window. Okay, it's upside down completely. When you put a subject that it doesn't fit the European canon. This is what happens. I hope I replied to you. So he is in the tradition of, he's a good painter, okay? Although I was told by the curator that he was a bad painter. That's another matter. We'll talk about this later.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Marcelo. I don't know if you have any other questions here. Let me see if I see any hands. I take a look at the chat.
I think I saw the chat. I saw some.
Okay, now it's fine. No questions in the chat, but I would like to build up in what Marcelo just asked in some of these categories, because also then of course some people read the book, others didn't, and people will be watching this video afterwards because the video stays on YouTube. And there are two issues, there are perhaps three questions that are related questions, sort of comments that I would like to make. It's still related to the terms. I think that is important, even if you are in art history, that we discuss these terms, because especially when we are teaching and using, then when we teach, at least we use a number of these images sometimes to illustrate what you are showing. I teach currently a course on African diaspora, and of course the students, they are being bombarded with the idea that this African presence in Europe predated the moment that is that where this book starts. Then in the Iberian Peninsula, you have people of African descent, and that at least in the Mediterranean, who are traveling back and forth, not with the legal status of enslaved people. Of course, Carmen's book focuses on the period when the Atlantic slave trade was already in place. And there are two elements. Part of the period that you are looking at here, of course, then Portugal was also then a Catholic kingdom that was, even in terms of its crown, for a few decades unified with Spain. And I ask myself about the possible relations that we have between these Spanish representations then in Hapsburg of enslaved people and Black people, which is not the same thing. At least it became during the period of the Atlantic slave trade. Then Portugal first. Also, I ask myself whether we can dissociate these images, the way they appear in the Iberian Peninsula, from what is happening in the Americas, starting then in 1492, because, for example, you are going to have enslaved people who are perhaps not considered artists in formal terms, but who are producing art. Then sometimes we do not have necessarily clear documentation, but in practice, they were producing art. Also, in terms the issue of the terms that we already discussed in Ethiopia, and I think that you clarified that, but the term mulatto is a problematic term as well. Then in the United States, this term is a term that is, I would say, a derogatory term, then that we have to take that into account clearly. That is a term that today here in the United States, and even in places like Brazil, that has been accepted and used for a long time, today is largely contested. But in addition to that, we have in the sources of this period the use of this term mulatto only to indicate that that person was no longer an enslaved person. Then the mulatto person, between quotation marks, is not necessarily someone who is mixed race, but it could be simply someone who was freed. But all these categories, of course, I think that you acknowledge that they are changing all the time, but they are changing also because of these disconnections with Africa that were ongoing. Then this African presence in the Iberian Peninsula was not frozen. And in addition to that, also the Americas that were the Americas, and also Portugal. And then I ask myself, because in the book we don't see this connection with Portugal, and I ask if you would have more things to add on that, and also with this dialogue with the Americas.
Yes. Okay, fantastic questions. Okay, I'm going to start, before I forget, you mentioned artists practicing, Black people of different backgrounds practicing artists. The person who asked me the first question, I forgot to add this, so I'm going to add this in. In spite of the prohibitions of artists in Spain, or artists of African descent in Spain, of New Christians to be artists, they were, because there is enough documentation in Spain that shows that artistic workshops was full of slaves, okay, enslaved people. So they are actually documents. And in fact, my next project is about the African contribution to visual culture, because I want to go deeper into this in rescuing the presence of African people in artistic workshops. So there are actually men and women in artistic workshops. They are embroiderers, they are sculptors, they are involved in different aspects of the visual production, like in Latin America, but less in a less open way. But there is enough documentation for the presence, okay? Now, the categories, I'm going to go to the categories. Mestizo and mulatto. Okay, I didn't know that, and it's fascinating, Ana Lucia, what you just told me about mulatto. I was always surprised that Pareja's biography in 1715, he was defined of a strange color. And mestizo originally meant that is a mixture of indigenous person and Spaniard. But in Spain, in that period, means mixed race, the son of a Black person and a white person. This is the actual terminology, the right terminology. Mestizo is what corresponds to what it used to be corresponding as the child of a Black and a white person. So this is what Pareja is, was a strange color, right? So this is the connection with the Americas. I didn't do much about, you write about Portugal and the Americas. I did notice though, in the work of confraternities, the presence of indigenous people who came as enslaved people to Spain, and it came later as well. I mean, 1542 was the abolition of the indigenous slavery in the Hispanic world, because in Portugal it was much later. So in fact, in order to buy and sell indigenous people after 1542, the Spaniards would go to Portugal, to the Kingdom of Portugal, and buy their illegal slaves, illegal Native American slaves, right? 1542 was the abolition of slavery in Hispanoamerica and the Canary Islands, okay, but not in Spain, okay? So I'm absolutely fascinated about the connection with Latin America from the point of view and the voice of these African people. For instance, this is one of my projects for the future, or is actually happening now, is we know that one of the things that Pareja does is he is the first artist in Spain who introduces the iconography of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Spain. So the Our Lady of Guadalupe, that means the Pareja is aware of what's going on in Latin America. So that is this is an aspect that I will actually, I am investigating already. Okay, so I am trying to recreate the network of artists and patrons that Pareja has in order to actually know the network and know what was going on. How is it that Pareja painted Our Lady of Guadalupe, the first one from Mexico, next to the chapel of Our Lady of Copacabana from Bolivia in Madrid. So this is the connections that I would like to expand. But in this book, I just wanted to contextualize these two paintings of Juan de Pareja, because I thought that there was nothing written about these issues, And I wanted to give an overview and a context to actually create conversations and opening up the field, and also to become an interruption to the hegemonic, the British hegemony of transatlantic studies. So these were my intention. I hope I replied to some of your issues, Ana Lucia.
Thank you so much, Carmen. We have a question from Stuart Schwartz. Then he is asking here in the chat. I will ask Stuart to unmute himself.
I'm unmuted. Can I be heard?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
please go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much, Carmen, for this very interesting talk. I'm anxious to get a hold of the book and to read it. I have a couple of questions and a comment about some of the recent discussion. When Portugal separated from Spain in 1640, it sent embassies to various other nations in Europe, and it signed a treaty with Sweden. The Swedes sent an ambassador to Lisbon, and he, after a couple of years, converted to Catholicism. And the Portuguese ambassador in Sweden wrote that he would neither be saved as a Catholic or as a Protestant because he had become a mulatto of faith. And white skin and woolly hair. That was what he said in his letter. Mulatto simply came to mean a mixed category. And this is a society that believed in fixed categories, noble and commoner, black and white. And so things like mestizo and mulatto are definitional. They're supposedly terms of ethnic or racial description, but they're not. They're really contextualized by social status and social position. I've often seen, in fact, Ana Lucia, I've often seen many slaves described in letters of manumission from Brazil as escravo mulatto. So it's a mulatto that doesn't necessarily mean free. It can continue to mean slave. I thought your talk was very interesting in the way in which Blacks were represented in the individual paintings that you spoke of, and that wonderful portrait of Pareja. But I have two questions. One is the absence of the representation of people of color when they ought to be there. I'm thinking of the great paintings of the victories of 1625 that hung in the Escorial, which had, for example, Maino's reconquest of Bahia, in which there's not a single Black person in Bahia. You have Olivares, and you have Philip IV, and you have all the leaders of the expedition and the common people of Bahia who are giving help to the wounded, but there's not a single Black person there, nor in the similar painting on the defense of Puerto Rico that also hung at the same time. And so I'm wondering about the absence of representation of people of color. At the same time, the paintings that you show are basically by high-scale artists, often commissioned painters painting religious scenes or portraits. And I wonder if in the popular images, like ex votos, if there's a difference in the way in which people of color are represented. And finally, there are lots and lots of slaves who are not Black in Spain at this time. They're Moriscos. After Alpujarras, many are enslaved, and even American Indians, because although 1542 is the official ending of the enslavement of Indians on the frontiers, the defense or attack of missionaries, etc., was always a justification. So there was always a big loophole. And in Chile, they were enslaving Indians well into the 18th century. So those are all kind of things that came up in the talk that I'd like to give you a chance to respond to.
Sí, so fantastic. Thank you so much for these fantastic questions. Right. Okay, let's start with the absence of representations. This is what intrigued me most when I started my research. That is, Iberia is the place where there is a high visibility of the African population or African descent people in the early modern period, more than in the rest of Europe. In fact, it's very estimated, a very conservative view to think that 15% of the major cities like Seville, Lisbon, and Valencia were 15% were Black, right? So, but in the visual form, they are the minimum representation in Spain. And I think one of the theories of the lack of representation of Black people in images like the one that you mentioned there in 1633 in the Hall of Realms in Madrid by Maino and the other painters is because of the trauma of have been colonized for 8 centuries by the Muslims and the Moriscos in the Iberian Peninsula. And in fact, there is a fantastic articles about why is it that the representation of the Magos, the Black Magos, was introduced so late in Spain. Spanish artists couldn't face to introduce the image of the Black Magos in the pictures because they have the real Black people in their territories, whereas in the rest of Europe they didn't. Okay, they have the empire. They met the other people. They were colonized by the Moors. So there is a completely new situation, right? The ex-votos, I really didn't investigate the ex-votos, and I apologize for that. And it's a fantastic new field for me to do. It is absolutely true that in Spain there were Black slaves, white slaves, Moorish slaves, Christian slaves, and Muslim slaves. There was some mixture of slaves because they were the confluence of 2 practices of slavery: Mediterranean slavery, which was flourish, especially in the Crown of Aragon, especially Valencia was the focus of it, and that did not diminish with the fall of Constantinople. It didn't diminish with the emergence of the transatlantic slavery. It was complemented. So nowadays there are 2 fantastic historians, Manuel Chavez and Rafael Perez, who are bringing to light the more active participation of Spanish involvement in the transatlantic slavery. So because there was the transatlantic slavery started with the Portuguese and having a long, strong power even over the Spaniards, and it was an internal slavery market in Spain itself. So the representations, I didn't concentrate myself on the representations of white slaves, but there are the representation of white slaves, especially, and I was just showing this to my students last week. When I said that there is no such a thing as the iconography of slavery, I should have said there is no such a thing as the iconography of Black slavery, because there is the iconography of white slavery, which is the captive Christian in North Africa. So you have the Mercedarians and Trinitarians, these religious orders who were created in medieval times in order to rescue white Christian Spaniards from the north of Africa when they became slaves of the Muslims in the north of Africa and the Arabs. So there are fantastic representations in Valladolid of San Peter Nolasco rescuing or ransoming or paying for the freedom of white slaves with the fetus in the necks, etc., etc. There are more representations in the literary form and in the visual form of white slaves than Black slaves. Okay, but it was not the objective of the aim of my book to go into white slavery and American slavery in the territory, in the crowns of Aragon and Castile. Well, thank you very much for that, and I would love to contact you and talk about the ex votos. That would look fantastic. That would be fantastic. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you, Carmen.
Yes.
I don't see any questions here, but apparently we have a question in the chat. Then I will ask Alex to go ahead and ask the question.
Yes, I'm asking a question from YouTube. And this question is by Lara Fernandez Gonzalez. Says, Hola, Carmen. She says, I was wondering if you know more about Juan de Pareja's life in court as a court painter after Velazquez passed away. Now, I know you said a few things about that already, but if you could expand a little bit about his life in court.
Okay, gracias, Laura. It's a really interesting question. Okay, Velazquez died in 1660. Pareja was freed in 1650. So 10 years after Velazquez died, and he is inherited by Velazquez's only daughter, who is married to the court painter Juan Bautista Martinez de Mazo. So he decides to carry on at the service of the Velazquez family as an enslaved person, but not as an enslaved. I don't know, it's a very difficult position to explain. It's like, when he was freed, the manumission document said, this freedom is given to you in Rome, but it's applicable at the court and it's applicable in Spain for 4 years. 4 years means it's a legal thing. It doesn't mean 4 years. It could be 40 years, it could be 10 minutes, it could be, it's a kind of legal format to say you have to pay for your freedom. You cannot be free immediately. This is the practice of manumission, is that the enslaved who is free have to pay for his or her freedom, and it's always more expensive than the price, the original price when they bought the slaves. So he carried on as I suspect now with the new research that I'm doing, I suspect that Pareja was already free, has an independent career even before his manumission. But nevertheless, he belonged to the family and he stayed with the family because he was the executive, how would you say, when you are the witness of the will of Velazquez's daughter. He stayed until he died in 1770 with Velazquez family. And he worked at the court, and he worked with artists at the court. He was permanent at the court. But I don't know much yet. This is just something, a bit of a speculation, but a bit of new things that I'm discovering that I don't want to open up completely. Thanks.
Thank you, Carmen. I don't know if we have another question from Fernando Herrero, and I will, please unmute yourself, I will add you here.
Hello,
Hola,
Carmen, can you hear me? ¿Qué tal?
Sí,
¿Cómo
sí,
estás, Carmen?
muy bien, muchas gracias.
Very enjoyable the talk, of course. If you allow me, I'd like to tell a great anecdote, and then I have a panoramic question for you. Whether the audience likes football or not, there was a great anecdote in English football. Cavani, the Uruguayan player for Man U, called one of his best friends Negrito in a text message. It's affectionate. It was meant as an affectionate gesture, but that was picked up obviously by the English Premier League, and he was fined a horrendous amount of money. And after some back and forth, I think he was forgiven. But anyway, that is, I think, a Uruguayan Spanish, I suppose. That term is not derogatory, but if you translate it into English, it sounds like a big thunder. So that's obviously because we're always negotiating Spanish and English. We're negotiating the European background and those histories on this side of the Atlantic, but also obviously on the other side of the Atlantic, the US and Latin America. But the question I have is the following, which is a panoramic one, and I would like you to take it in whatever way you want to take it. One concept that we have not mentioned is the concept of Baroque, by El Barroco. So what happens in your book, in your research, when you put Blackness and Baroque together? in relation to what happens that you think is important for us not to miss in relation to Pareja, in relation to your bibliography, in relation to debates that may be happening in our history, Barroco Negro, or Barroco y Negritud, or Blackness and Baroque. What would you like to see happening in whatever space or environment you want to take it? Thank you. Thank you, Carmen.
Oh, wow. This is very difficult questions. I want to start with the anecdote. I was contacted by CNN when Luis Suarez said negrito to someone else, and he got fined. And I decided that it was a racist comment, because it was not affectionate. Affectionate is only when you call negrito in your house and with people that you know. But when you call someone else that you don't know, and in that context is not affected, it's racist. And I am guilty of him getting the fine, okay, Luis Suarez. Okay, so I'm completed your comment. The other one about El Barroco is a bit difficult for me, because I actually am very uncomfortable with definitions like Golden Age. I hate the Golden Age, the terminology of Golden Age. I prefer early modern. For me, Barroco has connotations, and I don't know how to use this terminology. So I decided to, because I wanted to explore the history of Black people, and to actually recover the memory of African people, the memory that have been sepulted, catapulted and denied. What is the history? What is the history of African descent people in Spain, in the crowns of Aragon and Castile? They all come from documents called inventories. They all come from objects. They are furniture, they are pieces of furniture, they are pieces of jewelry, they are pieces of cloth. They are not people. They are not people, not even in documents. So for me, this is a different story. It's a story from below. It's a story that has to emerge. And so I cannot possibly adopt these categories that were always ambivalent for me and I couldn't grasp. Are you there with me? It's a very complicated, it's a personal choice of mine. I wish I can explain better, but I decided not to use this terminology in order to avoid complications, and because I want to create something that is uncontaminated from these concepts, okay?
Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you, Fernando. And I don't know if we have more questions. Let me just check the chat. From Kofo, do you want to ask your question directly on video? I see your question in the chat. Let's see if I can see Kofo Adeleke here. Oh, I see her. Kofo, do you want to ask your question directly? Yes, please.
Okay, yes, yeah, because, I've, been trying to sort of do some quick, looking up. And then some people are saying that that Juan was already a free man when he got to Diego, and that he already had some knowledge of painting and art. I don't know how you sort of interpreted that. Did you come across that in your research, that information?
Well, no. Well, yes. There was another Juan de Pareja, okay? Another artist called Juan de Pareja. Not this one that we're talking about. And there is a document of another Juan de Pareja who was free and who was a painter, which is not the one we're talking about, which is not the one who worked with Velazquez in his workshop. Okay? So that guy who worked with Velazquez in the workshop, actually people believe different things until in the 1980s, the document of freedom from slavery from Juan de Pareja, signed by Diego Velazquez, was found. So the document signed of his freedom shows that he was, if he was made free, means that he was bought. Okay? So he wasn't an enslaved person, he wasn't a servant. There's a difference between a servant and a slave. A servant, can get married, doesn't lose his name or her name. It could be treated really badly as enslaved people, but they have a status of freedom, because society is divided between freed people, and enslaved. Okay, so definitely Juan de Pareja was an enslaved because he was given a freedom in 1650. That is absolutely no question about. And I got the whole document, and there is if you read Spanish, there is a fiction novel about Juan de Pareja, and there is the document of admission translated into Spanish. Okay, and I translated part of the document into English in my book. So it is absolutely undeniable that he was an enslaved guy. Now, it is surprising that he had a kind of freedom, he had a kind of personal relationship with his master that was different. Okay, the wealthier that your master was, the more possibility for the enslaved to be freed. Okay, and giving more privileges. So Pareja, Velazquez took Pareja for 2 years to Rome. Velazquez, and there is even a commentary by the Venetian ambassador in that period saying Pareja is a very dear servant of Velazquez. It seems a lot of affection that Velazquez have about him. So this is unusual. The treatment of enslaved people in Spain depend very much on the master. Okay? There are manuals of conduct on how to treat a slave in the households in Spain. Okay? I discovered one by the Dominican Vicente Mejias in 1566. So it says, how do you have to treat your slave? And if your slave is a Christian, you have to treat him better. Right? And you have to treat him better. You don't have to kill him because it's an investment. It's an economic investment. But you have to punish him, and you have to make him work hard in order to pay for his enslavement. Okay, so, but we know that Juan de Pareja was definitely an enslaved guy, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Carmen. We also see a comment in the chat by Caroline. I don't know if you want to bring your comment on video, Carmen. Caroline?
Oh, sorry. I was just piggybacking off of an earlier discussion about the use of terminology, and I just wanted to applaud you. I think that it's good to avoid kind of crystallizing whether they, different types of expressions within kind of more static fields like Baroque or even Golden Age, as you referenced. And I thought, I'm sure this is probably controversial, but since it's your field and as an art historian, I know Susan Verde Webster had a pretty stringent critique of a fellow colonial Latin American art historian about his use of the term Andean hybrid Baroque. She believes that does disservice to, I think, the vibrancy of different artistic expressions in colonial context, which can include, Iberia. So I was just adding that to tell you that I agree with your assessment. I think there's a lot of really important and interesting historiographic work in the field of colonial Latin America that perhaps would enrich your new research as well. I'm even Stuart Schwartz, who just spoke. He has a book that came out this year on blood and boundaries, and I think there's a young junior scholar, Chloe Earleton, who works on.
Yes.
So she has some really important work as well. I think people are doing a good job of centering Afro-descendant experiences within colonial Latin America and really problematizing our use of terminologies in exciting ways.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And I know the work by Chloe, and I totally agree. Yes, and also it says it would be fantastic if there is a more a closeness and a kind of interdisciplinary working between colonial, colonial academics in the colonial America and in the Iberias. Because we have lots of prejudice against each other, and we are invisible in making African people, in this case, dealing with African people, even more invisible because of the prejudices created by disciplines. Okay, so there is a kind of a long history of not wanting to work with anything to do with the metropolis or anything to do with Latin America. And this extreme have to be actually cut down and realize that African descent people have suffered and they're victims of both of the empire in the metropolis and outside the metropolis. And we have to actually reconquer the space and articulate the African space, because it's part of our history and it's part of our culture. It's not something added. It's a structural embedded part of Hispanic culture.
Yeah, and I would like to add one element because of course, you are looking at the early modern period, and in my opinion, as you are just emphasizing, it's impossible to study Black presence, African presence in the Iberian Peninsula during this time and later period without looking at Africa and by ignoring Latin America. It's impossible. There is something that is missing. This said, and this is what some Europeanists have been doing. Then they have been studying Europe without considering any connections with Africa, even though they make connections more with the Americas. But in the case of Spain, is particularly, I would say, problematic, because Spain is one of the last countries, if not the last, to engage, to recognize it as participation in the Atlantic slave trade and slavery, along with Portugal. It's still in Portugal, I believe that we have perhaps at this point more works about Black presence in Portugal, slavery in Portugal, and even initiatives memorializing slavery. Then this erasure of the Americas from these works is in many ways like the heritage of this long ignorance about populations of African descent, and they are there in the sources, and we have scholars of Europe who have been, of the Iberian Peninsula, who have been doing that, and also those working in Latin America and Africa. But then this is why this kind of work is very important. Now I'm seeing if we have more questions. I do not see, and then I had this question from Caroline, but she shared with us directly. Then as we are nearly after the, close to the end, I ask if there is any remaining questions. We have space, I would say, for one more before we conclude. Marcel wants to ask another question, then you can unmute yourself, please.
Again, Carmen, I was thinking just a quick comment about Palomino and Pareja, because this sentence, he opens this life with this thing. He says, mestizo of a strange, weird, un color extraño. And I was mirroring myself and as an art historian with Palomino, how and why he can't be precise about, you know what I mean? So there's a kind of psychological thing that he cannot explain this person. he cannot explain, and then he goes to the miracle of the king mediating and as a divine mediation, and then less on talk more.
Yes, there are few other things which is amazing. He said, I said to myself, why does he need to classify his ethnicity when he tells the story of the Pareja? Because he is the Spanish Vasari, right? So he's telling the history, the lives of Spanish people, the first one who writes about that. And the only one who is classified from the ethnic point of view is Pareja. So the fact that he is actually classifying him like that is extraordinary. And then he says, in despite of the disgrace of his nature, desgracia de su naturaleza, he is a good artist, he's a good painter, And what are the conditions that he established for the good painter? To be in bondage with Velazquez, to be at the service of Velazquez as an enslaved. This is part of being a good painter. So you see, these are really, it shows that, as you said, he doesn't understand his color, he doesn't understand his condition, he doesn't understand, he is uncomfortable, he's uncomfortable, he's another person, he is not part of society, right? So he has to justify in that way. But it's very striking. It's very striking that he used mestizo. It's very striking that he used the disgrace of his nature, and it's very striking that he uses, that one of the conditions of being a good portraitist is actually is the bondage, el servicio a Velázquez. Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's a lot to talk about this.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Carmen. And now we are going to conclude, and I just want to emphasize one more time that the book that you are reading today, that we discussed, is the book by Carmen Fracchia, published in 2019 by Oxford University Press, and the title is Black but Human. It's not. It's a very interesting book that it's not that long. It's about a book of 200 and something pages, and the images that Carmen presented in her presentation are in the book. Then you can just take a look. It's Oxford University Press website, or of course you can look at Amazon and other places. Now, thank you so much, Carmen, then for joining us. Thank you, Alex Hill, also Vanessa Holden and Jessica Johnson. But I just want to emphasize that we have another session of the book club coming on, and this is on February the 10th, which is our traditional time for those who are in the Americas. Then this is a Wednesday, 5 p.m. And this is the book by Erica Edwards, titled Hiding in Plain Sight, Black Women, the Law, and the Making of a White Argentine Republic. Meaning that we are going to continue the conversation then about but by now moving then to the Americas and to Argentina, which is a place that we do not focus often, and coming, of course, to a period that is closer to us than the 16th century that we focus today. And also, do not forget, if you are not looking at the schedule of the Slaveryarchive book club, that you can have the schedule. The website is slaveryarchive.wordpress.com. All the lectures, all the discussions are listed there. You can register for each one of the talks. And on February 17, we have a book by Michael Hapsburg, which is titled The Implicated Subject Beyond Victims and Perpetrators. Michael is a literary scholar who has been working then with the Holocaust, but you are going to see through this book that many of his work has an intersection also with this discussion about memory of slavery, and he is a reference in terms of the study of memory in general. Then I would like to add my co-host, Alex, who is here with us, and to thank him and the others who came to attend, our other co-hosts. And I hope that we join us for the next talks. Thank you and see you soon.
Thank you